Hi, I'm Beth Wenzel, Project Manager at the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, and I'm excited tonight to be able to share some updates about area of concern projects that we are planning for the Milwaukee River at both Lincoln Park and Estabrook Park. People have changed the Milwaukee River pretty dramatically in both of those locations. Estabrook Falls was actually made by people when they mined bedrock out of the river downstream. Falls is basically just where they stopped mining quite so deep. Ever since, it has prevented a lot of fish from migrating upstream to spawn. You might see salmon jumping up over the falls, but most of the native fish, in other words, the ones that naturally occurred here, like sturgeon and northern pike, aren't good jumpers, so most of them can't make it. So the primary objective of work in that area will be to fix that, to facilitate the migration of those native fish. At Lincoln Park, the river used to have a couple of big bends in it, so it used to kind of flow down this way and then loop back up before continuing on its journey to the south. And people basically cut this center channel right through the middle. And because it's too wide, the channel ends up trapping a lot of sand and mud, leading to a shallow, flat channel, which is not great for fish. So the objective here is to improve habitat, especially for fish, but other wildlife too. And I talked quite a bit about what we mean by habitat at our meeting in July. So if you want to learn more about that, you can watch that presentation as well. But basically, when we refer to good habitat for a fish, we mean that it has all the right things to make it a good home for that fish. So there would be places for them to find food, places for them to hide from predators, places to lay eggs, places that are good spaces for little baby fish to grow, etc. I've used the analogy of a river for a fish being like a house for a person. So you want different types of rooms and furniture to make it a good place to live. So that's basically what we'll be trying to do here, is create some different types of rooms and better furnishings to make the river a better home for fish and for other wildlife. We've been trying to reach as many community members as possible over the last several months to get feedback on these projects and make sure that we understand what people value about these spaces, so that we make sure that we maintain those values as we also improve the river for fish and wildlife. So this list here is just a sample of some of these efforts, the ways that we've tried to reach people. What I plan to share tonight is basically some of the recurring themes that we've heard, and also share some thoughts on how our proposed alternatives are responsive to those comments that we've received. But I do want to emphasize that we're still listening, we're still accepting comments and feedback, so please contact me with any thoughts you have and share this information with others and invite them to contact me as well. So let's start with Lincoln Park. I mentioned our primary objective, or objectives for the project are to improve habitat for fish and wildlife. But I also mentioned that, the historic manipulation of this area sort of messed up some of the sediment movement through this reach. And so we want to make sure that our solution, considers the management of sediment and how sediment moves through here. We also need to avoid increases in flood risk and maintain the recreation opportunities that exist there. Some of the community comments that we received are that, we value the quiet, scenic views, especially from the Oak Leaf Trail, and we enjoy wildlife watching here. So I think we should be able to see how a lot of what we're proposing will further enhance some of those activities. We also heard that it's an important educational area, particularly for some of the local youth. And related to that, it's an important area for beginners to try paddling. And I'll talk quite a bit about that more in a bit. We heard that more native plants would be great as long as they don't interfere with paddling and other existing uses. And as I mentioned previously, by native, we're referring to those plants that would naturally have occurred here before we started bringing in, plants and cultivars from other places. We heard that the riprap along the banks makes access difficult, particularly on this west side of the park. That's a particularly inaccessible bank. And we've heard that the fishing is okay in some places, but certainly could be better. So we came up with two general ideas for reshaping the main center channel and islands. And then we also developed a number of habitat ideas that really can be applied to either of these reshaping options. So I'll start with this first idea for reshaping the center channel. So in this case, we would be, basically narrowing that center channel to be the same width as upstream and add quite a bit of wetland and floodplain areas. So these green areas would be new wetlands and floodplains. And you can see the new channel is much narrower, and we'd be forcing more water through that center channel and reducing some of the flow over into that west side. I do want to note that, both the east and the west sides would be not dramatically changed, but we can talk about some of the habitat ideas for those areas in a minute. So one of the advantages to this option is that with this deeper channel, we can, we would have a deeper channel generally in the center, and we can also create some even deeper pools that around some large wood that we would place. And we also obviously are creating some additional floodplain and wetland, which has a lot of habitat values. One of or a few of the disadvantages are that, obviously if we're closing off this area here, that's kind of an interesting little channel right now. And I know there are some anglers that use that. There's, a scour pool that probably holds some fish currently. So, that would certainly be a loss. It also is a very dramatic change generally, and also would be a bit expensive just because it's a lot of reshaping of that area. So the second reshaping idea is, certainly a much lighter touch. So in this case, the primary reshaping idea would be to just really remove this northernmost island, which is suspected to trap some debris and ice and potentially could be contributing to backing up water upstream. So removing that and reusing some of that material to create some additional wetlands adjacent to this big island here would be the primary kind of reshaping idea. So the advantages are that it's simpler, so much less dramatic change, and maintains, those interesting and diverse areas, up in this area around this island up here. But in removing that other smaller, deposited island, we would hope to reduce some debris buildup and force some additional water down that center channel. So with either of these options, we can layer on a number of different habitat features. So I already mentioned, some of the ideas for wetlands adjacent to this big island, but we can also add some additional wetland area in this East Oxbow, which is both great for habitat, but also for attracting wildlife and aesthetic interest. So, probably not as dramatic a coverage of wetland and plants coming out of the water as is shown here, but if you can envision a portion of that, And here's a photograph of a similar idea where you've got some flowing water adjacent to some wetlands. And as I mentioned, it's an important system for a lot of spawning fish, including northern pike. So another important habitat enhancement is large wood. Okay, so we show basically anywhere you've got this hatch, our ideas where we might place large wood. So along outer bends of this channel, the advantage there is with the flows coming around that bend, and with the wood there, you can create additional scour pools, and the wood also provides great cover for fish. And if you're an angler, you know that those are great places to cast. We can also place wood in the center of the channel to sort of facilitate the development of some islands. Incorporating it into the wetlands is also another opportunity, both, to provide some scour and some cover for, juvenile fish, little young fish, but also, can be perches for a variety of birds as well. So a couple of images of how we've incorporated wood in some places, and you can see how this is a great little hiding place for fish. Another key, important feature that we're proposing here is a lot of riprap removal and grading back some of these banks, particularly over here on the west side of the park. So that both addresses the concern we heard about access from that area, but it's also an important, enhancement of the habitats. Because riprap is hard for people to walk over, but it's also difficult for turtles and other wildlife to navigate on steep banks as well. So flattening those and getting some natural vegetation will be a great improvement. We've got a note here about vernal pools. That's an opportunity to create a little pond in, especially perhaps in that larger island. A vernal pool is simply just a pond that fills with water in the spring and then dries up in the summer, so they're really great for amphibians. We also show some potential ideas for including some, bird houses and bat boxes. We show them on that large island, but there may be some other places where they could be incorporated as well. We show some point bars, particularly on the south side of several of these islands. Here's just an example of a rendering of what that might look like. And we can also incorporate some constructed turtle nests in those locations. With them being on the south side of these islands, they can be nice places for turtles to crawl up and bask in some warm sunlight. So having those turtle nesting boxes nearby can be a neat opportunity. The other thing that we show in here is an idea for incorporating some stone into the riverbed. I mentioned that there are some types of fish that need wetlands to spawn, but there are also some types of fish that need gravel and cobbles where they drop their eggs down into that clean stone surface. But they don't work if they get covered with silt and sand. So it's proposed in this location because the higher water speed coming, through and under that bridge should help keep those gravels and cobbles cleaned out. I do want to talk a little bit about the implications for paddling, because I know that that's an important activity in this area, and particularly as it affects people that are new to paddling. So we used a computer model to estimate how these different kind of reshaping ideas might change water depths and water speeds for a range of paddling flows. And I'm just going to show a couple of exhibits, but anybody who wants to discuss this in more detail, feel free to contact me. So these three images are the existing conditions, that sort of full reshaping idea, and then the partial reshaping idea. The color coding are water speeds. So, you know, the blues and greens are your lower velocities, and your oranges and reds get a little higher. I do want to note the fastest water speed that we have here is, you know, 3 feet per second, which is only about 2 miles per hour. And an average paddler can, you know, can go 3 to 4 miles per hour. But again, we're not talking about average paddlers. We're talking about people that are brand new to this. So my understanding is one of the common trips is to put in at the access point, get your sea legs and arms, you know, ready over in this east side where the water is really slow, and then come out, cut across the center channel up and explore this neat oxbow over on this side. Then, you know, the adventurous paddler might paddle upstream to come back in either through the center channel or back into that side. Or somebody that maybe doesn't want to go, you know, paddle against the higher speed water might just turn and go back down. So that's my understanding of a common trip. So if we were to reshape the channel, you know, fully, like the center idea, you know, similar low flow or low speeds in this east side, and then coming along here, you do hit some faster water in this center channel. So as a boat is coming out into there, if they're not ready for it, that higher speed will, you know, push the front part of their boat downstream, and that could cause some concern or even panicking, you know, but certainly would be doable, but more of a challenge. And then continuing up on this side, very similar to the existing conditions. And up in this area, you know, we've got some higher velocities or higher speeds again, but this time, you know, if the front part of your boat gets pushed downstream, that's probably where you're headed anyway. But definitely a little, could be a little bit more challenging for some people. If we look at the more partial reshaping idea, again, very similar, low speeds in the east side. Coming through here to get across this center channel is not significantly different than the existing conditions. Coming up this side is the same, of course. When we get up to the northern part of the area, we actually have, you know, maybe more options for a beginner paddler, because these lower velocities with this island removed could allow more people to explore, you know, this side, this channel before coming down. We also looked at water depth. So these are the water depths at low flow. The speeds that I showed were for high flows, because that would be our you know, our fastest moving water. And we looked at water depths at a variety of flows, but these low flows are when our water depths are going to be the lowest. And so we just wanted to show these. As expected, you know, in this kind of full reshaping idea, we've got some deeper water in that center channel. But, you know, in the existing conditions and the partial grading options, you know, in most locations, we've got more than 1 foot of water, which is enough for kind of your typical boat with a, you know, typical person inside of it. Or, you know, most canoes and kayaks don't sit much deeper than that in the water. So there'll be some areas, you know, existing conditions and, you know, in this situation in that center area, we're a little bit low. So let's go to Estabrook Falls. Again, the objectives here are to facilitate or allow for the migration of native fish. We also want to make sure that the existing, you know, opportunity to portage around the falls area is maintained at a minimum. Some of the community comments that we heard, well, they kind of were pretty wide ranging. We heard everything from it's time to return the river to the fish to don't change anything. But I think kind of the more sort of common refrain was, look, we understand the need and the importance of allowing fish to get up to their spawning areas, but we do like the aesthetic of this area. So, you know, if we can maintain some of that aesthetic, that would be preferred. We also heard that the portage route is not ideal, could use some improvement. So these are the alternatives that we had shown at the July meeting. We had one idea where we would do a bypass channel. So we'd create a little channel on the side. That was determined to be probably infeasible because this is all private land. And so in long-term maintenance of this could be a challenge. So the other ideas were kind of a longer, straighter chute with some steps, or like a fan-shaped, you know, route down the side of the river. Now, one of the concerns that we heard is, you know, because there's this wall over along the northeast side of the river, that could be a concern. We don't want to do anything to destabilize that wall. So we sort of looked at some hybrid options between these two, but looked at them over on the other side of the river. So these exhibits show velocities for a couple of alternatives that we looked at over here. So they're somewhat similar to the images I showed for the paddling water speeds, because of course, you know, the water speed is going to be important for migrating fish as well. So what we found when we were just cutting a notch through the falls is that we ended up sucking a lot of water over to that side. And the challenge with that is, as we pulled more water over there, the velocities stayed high because we just ended up pulling all the water to a smaller, you know, a rather confined space. And in order to get the velocities down, we had to go wider and wider with that notch. And we realized that, you know, we were no longer maintaining much of the falls aesthetic, because not only was most of the water coming over to this side, but, you know, a lot of this area was not having any water pass over it at all during the kind of summer peak beer garden time of year. So we modified this to still have our primary fish passage route over on this far side, but we experimented with the idea of removing a portion of the rock over in this area. So if you're familiar, these gray lines are basically your topographic contours or bathymetry contours. And so the fact that there's several of them close together indicate that there's still that drop there. And I'll show you what this looks like in the next slide. But the bottom line is, in doing this, we're able to achieve some lower water speeds. And then, you know, during higher flow conditions, some of the fish, you know, may be able to pass on both sides. So here's an idea of what, you know, what this might look like. You know, if you're standing up at the beer garden at the top of the steps there, this lowest drop would remain unchanged. Well, in this portion. You know, we would have a cut through it in the far side where our primary fishway would go. All of this rock in the center would remain unchanged, but we may, you know, we would be looking to cut down some of this portion of the rock at the top part of, you know, or upstream of the falls, just again to make sure that we're drawing water across, you know, both sides, and then water coming across here would spread across this falls. So this seems like a pretty good sort of hybrid whereby we can maintain that waterfall aesthetic while also creating conditions that would allow fish to pass. So what's next? At Estabrook Falls, we will continue to receive some additional comments. We've got some technical reviewers, fish and wildlife experts reviewing this, and we're waiting on some additional comments from them. Obviously, we're hoping to hear any additional comments from other community members as well. But then we'll be ready to refine a design and develop, the documents that we need to construct something there. And then we'll be seeking funding for that construction. At Lincoln Park, we're obviously receiving additional comments on some of the ideas that we've presented there as well. And we don't yet have sufficient funding to do the final design or construction at that location, but we'll be looking for that over the coming months. Again, I welcome and encourage you and any of your friends and neighbors and anybody else to contact me with any thoughts or concerns. Brennan Dow is the point of contact with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, so I've got his information there as well. And with that, I'll turn it back to Christina. Thank you.